Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Doomer Optimism. Today we have two native Appalachians here. We have Josh and Sara Day, and I thought it would be fun. I'm just bringing this on you, but I thought it would be fun to start by both of you talking about. Well, Josh is co-hosting, but I want to put you on the spot, Josh, and ask both of you, what does Appalachia mean to you growing up here, and where it is now and where it's going. So
Nice.
either of you can start.
I'll start.
Right.
It I'm a dreamer, and for me it's magic. I had what feels like a pretty magical childhood, with my family just immersed in nature, in this region, Kentucky, West Virginia, West North Carolina, Virginia, and just the biodiversity, which as a kid, of course, I didn't know what biodiversity was, but just it felt so magic before I learned all the other tragic stuff happening in our region.
Josh?
Yeah. I would say it's like, yeah, it's that mix of magic and tragic.
Yeah, good.
Where I grew up in West Virginia, it was kind of at the intersection of, to the south from me was mountaintop removal coal mining area and heavy coal industry stuff. And then in the river valleys to the north and to the east, what the area they call Chemical Valley along the Kanawha River and the Ohio rivers around Huntington and Charleston, and where we have all these big chemical plants and stuff like that. And so, I think that influenced me as a kid, seeing, what economic development, right? But where the profits from that go elsewhere, because the region kind of stays poor despite having this kind of economic development. And then a lot of pollution and other negative side effects of a lot of those industries occurring. And I think that that's probably seeped into my subconscious. And when I went to college and then on to grad school, I studied environmental chemistry and engineering. And I'm sure that there was like a subliminal message from my childhood of seeing issues of pollution and environment and poverty and exploitation by the companies kind of all mixed up together. So I think that informed, that's the sort of tragic part of it. But then as a kid, our family vacations were always to some state park somewhere in West Virginia where we could stay in a cabin, hike on the nature trails, see snakes and turtles and bears and stuff like that. And so that I definitely got a big dose of the magic of the biodiversity of the region.
Yeah, I just, like I said, it was, my early years that just instilled that in me. And we were living on a farm, and just we weren't in the strip mine regions as much. And I spent a lot of time hiking and wandering and exploring. But absolutely, as an adult, I ended up becoming a geologist.
Nice.
And one of my very first jobs was mapping coal beds, for the Kentucky Geological Survey. And I kept saying, why are we just mapping coal beds? There's plenty of other strata to be mapping out there. And so clearly I was raising an issue that the state was prioritizing where the coal beds were and how thick they were so that they could be mined. And as I tend to do, they created a division of one for me. Because they could see I was going to be a troublemaker. But that was, they had some sense about them. And they created a division where I could work on lands unsuitable for mining. And typically that was something historical, burial grounds in particular.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm a newcomer to Appalachia, but I hope to be here long term. I love it here. But yeah, it's nice to hear from the locals. Okay, well, I think we can get started. Sara Day, you've talked a little bit about your background. If there's anything, is there anything else you want to say leading up to what you're doing now with Accelerating Appalachia?
Yeah, sure. The trajectory of my getting here, and just a real quick blurb about Accelerating Appalachia is it's an incubator focused on rebuilding regional resilient production of our basic needs: food, clothing, shelter, and health. And I was focusing on the products that were being sourced by food, fiber, and forest farmers, so that I could reach farmers, because my ultimate goal was, well, there were several goals, but regional production was critical. I mean, we're seeing it now in a huge way with collapsing global supply chains. And it made no sense to me that we had decimated that. But the other part of that was just my deep love of land and farmers, and just reaching as many farmers as quickly as possible, to keep them on the land first and foremost, and then work on the shift of what's regenerative ag, good land use. I mean, there's so many. I mean, regenerative is the new hot thing, but we've been at this for a while. So there's that. That was born out of a trajectory, a quite wandering trajectory of this, this life immersed in nature, growing up in this region, and my parents, who were both physicists, but just nature loving folks, people loving folks. We had, my parents were activists. We had raucous family gatherings and music, and just amazing people from around the place. And then I eventually went into science as well. I was a musician, and turned down a recording contract because the industry was unbearable at the time. This was during the 90s, before the internet really took off. I still love music, but I didn't want that life. I didn't want that lifestyle. But all throughout that, I ended up, when I was fairly young, I just hopped on a bus, went to the Grand Canyon. I needed to see what was west of Kentucky. And that's when I really got deeply into geology and hydrogeology, underground water, just the nature of water management and all the controls that are happening out west. Ultimately, that land, I did come back to Kentucky, got married, moved back out to California. My husband was at Stanford in plant genetics. Turns out he was Wendell Berry's nephew. We didn't know that at the time. Wendell and my dad were actually frenemies in college. We can get into that a little bit. But when Ray and I got married, it was really lovely. Although they did expect us to come back. Wendell's good friend, when they had a going away party for us, Ed McClanahan, who was hilarious, incredible writer who only wrote several books, but a dear friend of Wendell's. He said, well, we'll see you in 10 years. Sure enough, 10 years passed and I did come back, but Ray stayed in San Francisco. He really found himself in California. And he was a plant biologist who walked away from biotech. That was, what was happening at Stanford at the time. Biotech was growing out of Stanford, and he deeply disagreed with biotech. Nonetheless, I moved back and was extremely welcomed back by my family. And Wendell came to visit and just wanted to make sure we knew that we were still family. And so we're super close. Ray's out in San Francisco living his life, and that's great. He was not a huge fan of Kentucky. So I finally finished my degree and went to work for the state, developing a groundwater protection program for them. It was like a dream job for me because I was working with rural communities and rural well protection. And from there, I was with them 13 years and then was offered a job in Western North Carolina. And I was really interested to come here. I had spent a lot of time visiting, but that's when I kind of went to the dark side a little bit. It was with the Department of Commerce, but it was this framework of a program to to work with the hardest hit counties in this region that had lost their jobs due to outsourcing companies leaving for cheap labor. What we've seen again and again here. And they had, a vague attempt to, work with those counties that had, lost their textile and their wood products industries. But it was just a half-hearted attempt, and nothing really changed. They allocated very little money to this program. My thought was, if we're going to incentivize big industry, which they continued to do and recruit big industry in, why couldn't we incentivize a cluster of 50 communities or 50 businesses within a community? That was just too odd and bizarre. Anyway, that was the breaking point for me when I really saw what could be here. I knew we had to keep small farmers in the land because I just have known that growing up all of my life and learned so much from Wendell. And they're the producers. They're the producers of what we need to survive on. And but it was that working with those rural communities that the heart that I found there, the heart and the love of place, but also the desperation and the really dire circumstances. But I saw all these, really thoughtful, caring businesses that were sourcing from farmers or were farmers who had value-added products, and there was, little to no incentive for them. We started Accelerating Appalachia out of that sort of focus of how can we support farmers and these businesses who are also working to keep farmers on the land. How can those businesses help to incentivize the farmers so we can at least initially keep farmers on the land? Because the loss of small farms is, Kentucky is the second in the nation for losing small farms. And then clearly the biodiversity of this region, the deep knowledge of farming and the deep knowledge of heirloom seeds, the rare climate soil combination that we have here as one of the top 5 most biodiverse regions in the world. Just all of that information coming in and really deeply understanding this place and seeing people actually, hopefully taking action. And I wanted to help and support that.
So if I could, I'm really interested to try to get right to the sort of nucleus of when you're conceiving of Accelerating Appalachia. Your goal is to support local producers, keep the small farmers on the land, start to build an incentive structure for people to develop a whole chain potentially of regenerative businesses, right? But you're starting in a region that's, it's one of the poorest regions of the country. It's a region that's been in economic decline for decades.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really curious to know about what is the sort of nucleating mechanism? Is this okay, well, we need to get some outside money in from philanthropy to kind of get the ball rolling, and then it kind of reaches a sort of self-sustaining kind of steady state? Or is it something that can be totally bootstrapped from within? Or what are your perspectives on how you initially get the ball rolling with something like that? After so many decades of everything kind of just on this slow grind.
Right.
Now you're going to turn that trajectory around. How do you start that ball rolling?
Well, number one, I saw that ball already rolling. And let me make a clear distinction. You know this as well as I do, Josh. Western North Carolina is very different from West Virginia and very different from East Kentucky. East Kentucky and West Virginia have coal. Western North Carolina does not. Had it had coal, it'd probably be in that same impoverished state.
Mm-hmm.
So what I saw in Western North Carolina, and what I know to be true in Kentucky, I can't speak as much to West Virginia, but I know it's there, is there a lot of small, I mean, because of the geography of this region, that defines what kind of farm you have. There's more wealth in Western North Carolina to support the businesses. But I know of the wealth of knowledge, and there's a lot more going on. Well, Grow Appalachia is a great organization, by the way, that's been teaching homesteading and farming in West Virginia and Kentucky for years. And just the knowledge that people have of seeds, heirloom seeds, over 1,500 heirloom seeds under cultivation. And it wasn't me saying, okay, I'm just going to make this up. It was observing that movement that I thought, well, what do they need? How can I support them? And yes, I worked very hard and it's still a work in progress. Let me be extremely clear about that. You know, we've been at this 10 years and it's still, I've made every mistake you could possibly make, I think. But yes, so bootstrapping, because it really depends on the farm, it depends on the business and how they want to go about it. I'm not going to force investment on them. Our approach, unlike other business accelerators, we just flipped that whole idea on its head, was not to force a sale, but for a business, which is typical with VC investment. And it was to educate and build a network of investors that were non-extractive. And that was probably the hardest piece. But as this was happening, as we were doing this was happening across the country, that impact investing, but I put the quotations on that, was evolving in a big way. And impact investing, as you probably know, is either people, planet, and prosperity, whatever. I mean, we were looking for folks that had similar values of keeping small farmers on the land and saw the value in good land use. And now that it's become clear that good land use draws down carbon, there are actually more and more funds that are now in existence that were not in existence 10 years ago. I mean, we had to just literally make it up as we went along. For those that were seeking funding, is to hold lenders, hold funders accountable. Patience. If this business, if this business wants to join with equity, if the business founder isn't interested in selling, then they have to bring equity that doesn't force a sale, quasi equity, or, this is not my expertise, by the way. I've learned an awful lot about how money flows and impact investing and the extractive natures of that. But we've made it pretty far in that we've seen the landscape change so much. There are now over 15 funds around regenerative agriculture and now there's actually finally funding to simply pay farmers to adopt regenerative practices. And no, the carbon markets, a lot of that's really messed up and extractive. We are working with folks in this region who are building a regional carbon exchange. But there are also grant monies now available which is what, it was one of the end goals, was how can we just keep small farmers on land? Well, we have to pay them to provide this ecosystem service, if you will, of drawing down carbon. And it seems like it's finally, again, as you probably have heard, the USDA is putting $1 billion out there. And it's a big experiment for them. We already know that these practices draw down carbon, retain water, improve soil health or nutrition, rebuild rural communities. We already know that. I think most of us here do. So
So do you have like, is there some kind of a rubric or something that you use? Because I'm imagining you're going to be discriminating a lot among your investors, like whether it's people who are from the region or they have some tie to the region. Like, you're not just looking for any Joe Blow investor, but
No, we're not.
certain characteristics. So I'm interested to hear about if you have a rubric system or a screening system or a vetting system for how you make decisions about who can invest in this project.
We do.
Yeah.
Yes, we do. We're very discerning. In fact, we drop investors that, a lot of folks came at us in the beginning like, oh, cool, this is a very unique business accelerator. And again, I learned an awful lot about this. It was just a veil, this term impact investing. The returns were just as extractive, wanting a return in 3 to 5 years, and far too much of a return, in my opinion, and in the opinion of we really look to our businesses to what they wanted and needed. We have a huge network. We know a ton of investors, but those that we actually engage with, we just push them to do better. Can you do this for 1%? Can you do this for 1%? And can you wait 7 to 10 years? Or a lending. We had some real good success with CDFIs, community development financial institutions, that their whole mission is to work with underserved regions and not be extractive. And we had more success with them than with some of the initial big impact investors. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
But it is just it's business by business, Josh. If that makes sense. I mean, I just couldn't give you a rubric, as it were, because it depends on what they want and what they need. Yeah.
So then you're in a sense, you're kind of playing matchmaker between someone who's wanting to do a business startup and someone who's wanting to do some kind of eco investing, and you sort of match make those opportunities for.
Right. Once they go through our program, it's not just about like matching them with funding. There are plenty of businesses that want to bootstrap it. And we just have a network of trainers and educators and all these sectors of business development, and then a holistic management decision-making process that they go through. We train them in all the regular things like knowing your customer and branding. But it has a lot to do with they are filtering, they are utilizing a holistic management decision-making process that one of our trainers and educators, who's right here in Western North Carolina, Laura Lennick, is extraordinary. She's written a book called Resilient Agriculture, and she's got a second one that's just come out. That said, they are typically businesses that are already underway, and an incubator is more for brand new, like idea stage businesses. Okay. Accelerators are when they're in that phase of, oh shit, they really like me. How do I keep up? I need to hire some people. I need a new space. And that's that critical juncture where they make a decision about whether they want to take on investment or not. Because it's like getting married, especially if it's equity. And that's where we really go hard with not, making sure that we're not bringing in, extractive folks. Mm-hmm. It's not perfect, but we've definitely made some headway and influence. There's so much going on in finance now. Crowdsourcing is just, it's finally taking its rightful place in that, you can look to your customers to be your funders as well. And banks have felt the pressure because there's many alternatives to a bank loan these days.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, when we look for the businesses that we look for are, again, either a farmer with value-added products, or a farmer sourcing from 10, 20, 30, 200 businesses. You know, diversity is key in everything to me. Diversity equals life. Diversity in our communities, in our agriculture, in our economy, and every time, you know, you try to mono source it, mono crop it, you're set up for blight. And that's what we've done with our economy, as you know, in this country. We're sourcing so much of our goods from a few huge agribusiness companies, and you know, it's never made any sense to me. And I know I do sometimes. I know I'm working with an old and broken structure. And I'm sort of, you know, like, what can we keep of this that could possibly work for folks? And again, our design is for regional, but just to emphasize that my goal was also reaching lots of farmers quickly. And that's why we were selecting for, because my thought was, well, if I were to try to just go to farm by farm and say, hey, here's this great new, you know, here's some great land use techniques, and a lot of folks have been doing this stuff for years, so I'm not going to be some wise ass going in there. But how that was why I took the strategy that we did, was that these businesses could incentivize the farmers and also get the word to them around regenerative agriculture if they weren't already adopting those practices. But again, now that there is significant funding available to just pay farmers directly, we're working on a big project right now with about 6 different groups of folks to help incentivize farmers. You know, it'll be, you know, we won't be heading into it until later in the year, but I'm really excited about that.
I wanted to ask you about, you know, carbon drawdown as perhaps a significant source of like a funding pool. And
Yeah.
Speaking of diversity and not monocropping, you know, a concern that some people have with this single-minded focus on carbon drawdown. I mean, I think the optimistic idea is that, well, you get paid to draw down carbon, but you're actually providing all these other ecosystem services as well, the water capture,
that's right,
biodiversity. And so you're kind of, you know, it's kind of like a means to an end in a way. But there's also the concern that, you know, Goodhart's law, that when a measure becomes, I have this right here, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure, right? If you're, you know, like, people will start gaming the system where you start drawing down maximum carbon to the, you know, to the exclusion of everything else, right? To
correct,
detriment of everything else. And so I'm wondering how you're thinking about that and navigating that.
Yeah, good. You're absolutely on point. And to me, it's frustrating that the funding is so carbon focused. But I mean, we start with the farmer first, and what's appropriate for that farmer's land. What does that farmer feel like they can do? And we consider all of, I mean, number one, there are some things that many farmers can do. And of course, silvopasture is one of them, or agroforestry. Always adding trees is always a good thing for your land. And and it doesn't just ramp up, you know, it doesn't just draw down more carbon, but our approach is that, yes, carbon, great, but we are focused on all of those parameters as well, and especially like rebuilding rural communities. And so we're looking at, you know, that aspect of just, again, keeping the farmer, paying the farmer to be on that land, and starting with the farmer first, though. You know, we're not dictating to them. We have trainers in about 10 different practices, land use practices, that, yes, they draw down carbon in varying levels. And, but we're going to be measuring for soil health, We're going to be measuring for water retention. I mean, we are going to be measuring, which is actually the first time we've actually started to measure, because again, as you can see, our emphasis was in a different. It was focused on the businesses and the farmers, and just, how can we keep them there first and foremost. Now that we have funding to help keep them there, we can go a little deeper into measurements.
I'm kind of curious to know how you're identifying some of these people that you want to work with. I mean, are you going around to farmers markets and meeting people? Are you taking out an ad in the newspaper? Are you advertising stuff online? Mostly, are people coming to you and say, hey, I want to hear about these funding programs that you offer? Or how are you doing your outreach to, if you're like, well, we want to keep these farmers on the land and we want to support them to be there and to be the start of this value chain. So how do you make that first connection?
Well, we already have massive network of farmers, and through the businesses that we work with and through all the farm organizations that we work with, every state has several farm organizations. ASAP is the one, Appalachian Sustainable Agriculture Project in West North Carolina, Kentucky Farm Alliance in Kentucky. And to be clear, we haven't started this yet, Josh. We're just beginning. But we'll do, we're actually working with a marketing company to figure out how to best reach as many farmers, have them, apply. And then, we'll conduct a survey across the farmers. We hope to reach where our goal is 750 farmers initially, to actually go through the process. But through that and the training that and the promotion of this that's going to be happening across the farmer networks, we hope to reach many thousands more than that, just with the concepts. So
yeah, no, this is I think Josh and I have been talking about lately. We're both interested in kind of working, within kind of food systems in this region. I know, Josh, you're interested in kind of like, you want to be an entrepreneur, seeing like what opportunities there are. I'm associated with App State, the Sustainable Development Program, and I'm hoping to help influence that program to be, it already is somewhat applied, but to continue it in that direction of, of really being connected with, the regenerative economy in this region. And I guess my question is, how do you, for folks like us who really want to get our hands dirty and involved and help out, do you see ways for us to plug in, right, to these networks and to be helpful, but also to get access to, just the connections and relationships?
Right. Well, thank you for that clarification. I had no idea. And so, why? I mean, I feel lucky to know you both, and would love to see how, like, I'm a generalist, but I think one of my greatest values is I have a brain for connecting people. It works that way, and it's a huge network that we have, and I'm fairly good at, I'd love to. I've never really done a big mind map around this, which I wouldn't mind to do, because I don't want it to just reside in my brain. It needs to get out. I'm gonna, one day I'm gonna just, disappear off on another journey, and it needs to be available. So I'd love to figure out. I mean, Josh, I'm so sorry. We met because of Jim Rutt, right? He introduced us, and we had we had a little conversation, because it was like something about supply chains and blah blah blah. And actually, I figured it out. It was a fellow that had worked with us was working with Hickory Nut Gap at that time.
Yes, yeah.
And I talked to him, but he wasn't a fit for them. And that's all fine and well. But I was very intrigued with, like, your your background in that, because that's a piece that's so like critical, is how, how we build this resilient, how we, really on the ground build this resilient supply chain. We've made a pretty good effort at it with the farmers and and we call them producers, or we could call them manufacturers, I guess. Mm-hmm. But it's really complex. It's more complex than I still don't get all the pieces and parts. I don't have to. I just have to know people that do. And Josh, you're interested in being an entrepreneur. What's like inspiring you? What do you want to get into?
For me, my wife and I are mostly focused on producing for ourselves and our friends and family. So we're starting at the very, very small scale.
Right.
We've only been in Wilkes County for a little over 2 years. And so the procedure is to kind of figure out like what is going on and where we can plug in.
I gotcha.
I wear multiple hats, and one of my main hats is working with communities abroad on water and sanitation projects. So I'm an environmental engineer by training.
Okay.
And so I partly work on that kind of stuff. And then I'm partly managing our place where we have a few sheep and goats and pigs and stuff like that. I guess there's many different ways I kind of come at this. For 20 years, I've been massively concerned about all of the problems around unsustainability and how to transform an economy, basically on a bioregional or local basis, to build resilience against global supply chain issues.
Yes.
And also all of my work abroad in, quote unquote, global sustainable development. And I see the forces of globalization and development, being so exploitive and causing a lot of the problems of poverty, pollution, public health issues that, engineers and people are going out and trying to solve. So part of my approach to local economies here is like a harm reduction approach. If we're more able to meet our needs locally from locally available resources, then we're not so dependent on these far-flung global supply chains that exploit people elsewhere,
right?
Impoverish them. So it's kind of an indirect method of trying to help, quote unquote, poor people in other countries by becoming more self-reliant here, right?
Yes.
And then there's a question of, well, okay, yeah, but I got to make a living. Everybody's got to deal with money, figure out how to have an income. I spent my life, in and out of academia, where the response is always like, well, maybe I could write a research grant.
Oh my God, I know. Oh my God, it's throughout the regenerative ag world. It's like so much academia, and I'm just going to say it's so much ego. I'm just like, I just hardly, I can't hardly engage anymore, because I'm like, we have talked about this for 1,000 effing years. Let's go to work, as Wendell would say. Hope is when you go to work on a thing.
Yeah.
That you dream, that you want to feel that you can die on a planet that you've loved living on. That as broken as things are, but it just starts right there where you are in your place.
Yeah.
And in your dream of, it's always tap back into that dream of the wildness and the beauty and magic that I know exists here.
So you highlighted something that I really strongly resonate with, which is that kind of frustration of being constantly in a talking loop about should do this and should do this. And okay, well, we need to write a proposal, and we need to form a committee, or we need to have a task force and all of this kind of stuff, or we need to create a certificate program and start credentialing this and that and the other thing. And I'm like, no, it's time to just like go out.
Too urgent. Yes.
And, prior to this, I did the like tenure track faculty thing for a few years, and I completely OD'd on that approach to life. And then I sort of swung to the other side, and I said, you know what? I just want to go out and shovel goat shit out of a barn.
Yeah.
Cut grass and kind of get back, get my sanity back again. But then so Jason and I have been talking about this, like thinking about, because we talk a lot about like para-academic research and education. So it's not completely shunning academia. It's not shunning that stuff, but it's saying, how do we work alongside it, but outside of it a little bit? So it's contextualizing what is going on. It's prioritizing stuff that's really practical, that people can actually do. And the response to everything is not just another certificate program or more research grants or something like that. But, that's one of the reasons I was asking you about these mechanisms that you all are developing. Like how does somebody get started? How does somebody get the ball rolling? Because at the end of the day, people have bills to pay. They got to pay the mortgage. Right. They got to put on the table or whatever they're trying to do. And so in a sense, it's the way I kind of think about it is I'm like trying to do a little bit of an experiment with my life to try to figure out, can I make a living doing regenerative agriculture practices? Mm-hmm. And if I can figure it out as a hopeless academic like me, if I can do it, I know a practical person from the country is going to be able to do it if I can do it,
Probably so. Probably that person from the country that's been living on the land most of their life, that has to be supported. But I just high five on just about everything you said. And we launched into this with like
a little money, like talk circles, of just like, and it's all talk and it's all build up, and then that step to go out and start getting it done. And it sounds like that's where you're at right now after 10 years developing this thing.
Oh yeah, I mean we've developed something really. It's a great model. It really is. I'm not abandoning that model, but I do want us to do more direct incentivization for farmers. Mm-hmm. That's where I'm seeking to get to. But you see, even then, by going through our model, which is, okay, I'm going to give you some examples of the businesses. Yeah. Okay, so we can see what this means. Carolina Ground. She's Jennifer Lapidus. She is the only organic flour mill in the Southeast that sources entirely from the Southeast. She sources her grains from North Carolina, South Carolina, and I think Georgia. So she has, I think, 20 farmers she's sourcing from. Mm-hmm. Super conscientious. She's been a bread maker and a flour maker for 20 years now. And so reaching those farmers through her, I can, work with Jennifer and then now that we have some funds for incentivization, like, okay, we don't have to just say, farmers, you have to do this. That's absurd. Farmers are not going to listen to that. But here we actually can provide you with the training and some money that it takes for you to actually adapt these practices. But learn from them first what they're already doing. And then the EcoView fiber mill also here, they've got at least 200 fiber farmers around the South Central Appalachian region. So we can reach 200 farmers through them. Riverbend Malt, we worked with Kentucky farmers to grow regenerative barley that we released in 2017, the first all Kentucky sourced distiller's malt. Wow. And it was grown regeneratively in South Central Kentucky. Like Wendell, one of his sayings, eating is an agricultural act. He really doesn't like that at all, but he did give you permission to use drinking is an agricultural act. He still doesn't love that. He's like, of all the things to be remembered for, and that's just not one. But it's true. And as you know, the craft brewing scene is nuts here in Western North Carolina. I'm like 50 breweries, really? You need all that? But that said, I just think about the grains and I think, okay, how are those grains being grown? And so it was pretty exciting to work with Woodford Reserve, and which is my home county, which is where they're located, and farmers in the malt company out of this region to develop that. All the grains were sourced in Kentucky regeneratively, and now it's on the distillers to utilize that in a bourbon where they're also sourcing all their corn from Kentucky, which Woodford does do that, and several other distilleries. So that's just sort of one example. And I know I just wanted to give some elucidate, what this work actually looks like.
Yeah.
And again, our work in going into 2023 will be, connecting with those farmers, surveying them, and then, seeing who's really on board with adopting whatever practices are going to work best on their land. Because, we've got flatlands in Kentucky. We've got, geography defines everything around farming.
Mhm.
So we
Well,
hope to get some
you might have
bigger
already
commodity
answered-
growers to shift as well.
You might have already answered this question, but this is a question from one of the people when we announced this podcast. Let's see, I might just read it. I don't know if I can summarize it. He said, "I'd love to hear her take on a hierarchy of activities based on their impact. Is it better to get money, time, labor to market gardening on 1A, renting and holistic grazing on 100 acres, making and selling fungi-rich compost, selling nursery stock loaded with fungi?"
Yeah, I saw that question, and
Yeah.
I thought about it. I'm like, well, number one, I'm not the expert. I'm not an expert. I shy away from that. But I think probably, I mean, again, it's complex. I appreciate that question because I think about it a lot anyway. You think about the hierarchy of carbon sequestration. If we're just sort of looking at the hierarchy, you've got silvopasture, agroforestry, riparian buffers, but then applying good compost. I mean, that's just applying carbon right to the soil. So the hierarchy varies to me anyway, depending on the land, depending on the eco system of a particular, region or even local place.
Yeah.
Some things just won't fit.
Yeah.
Some things might, have, excellent carbon drawdown, but they won't fit for a particular place or farm. But there are people on our collective that do have much more knowledge on that, and I'm happy to reach out to Mike or one of the folks that could, talk in more detail about that.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that just comes to my mind, and I think this is everything about what you're doing, is there's just so much potential for creating new relationships and connections along the supply chain, right?
Exactly. Thank you. Let's not forget the human piece of this, because
Yes.
we talk about biodiversity, but really we focused, and we started out the very first year focused on biocultural diversity.
Yeah.
We were working on a biocultural measurement tool with the Stockholm Center, blah, blah, blah. It got a little too technical for me because again, Josh, like, I'm just kind of like, we have too much shit to do and too little time to do it in. And we may be fucking up, but we're just gonna go at it. And boy, have I fucked up. But anyway, that said, I hope your audience, I mean, they're mostly homesteaders, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
And just
no worries about that.
Okay.
Are just fine here.
Okay. And so that said, we just we really do want to execute this better now that we've learned a lot of those hard lessons. And something that we've learned, Jason, that you just really touched on, is that we need each other. And especially, this, you've got this whole network of folks in homesteading that you really need one another. You need to, you need that pure understanding, compassion, empathy, and intellect. I love that in person. I grew up without a TV. But I do see the real value in online communities as well. So that's just a critical piece and we get that feedback actually from our businesses and farmers that the two best things that they get from our program, it's not the technical training and all that, it's the mentor network and it's the peer network. Mm-hmm. And we could do a better job of bringing that peer network together. And this is where we've been discussing this online platform for an incubator, so that folks can really connect better. That's not something I'm not great at. The in-person, we've always done our programs in person, these intensive 8 to 10 week trainings where we travel around the region together. building this regional web. We host, trainings in different cities. It's the same group as like 15 entrepreneurs, sometimes 10. We couldn't do that during COVID, and it was really hard.
I was
Because
going to ask if you have plans for something like an annual conference or something like that, or a meetup or symposium or whatever you might call it.
Yeah, we're coming out of COVID now, and but again, keep in mind, COVID was extremely difficult for us. We had to, a lot of people that we work with, they're all doing their own things. They come in and they train. They're not like employees of Accelerating Appalachia. I'm not really a big fan of having a huge employee base, because we need people that are just really passionate about what they're doing and bringing their expertise to the table. So when we run these things over 8 to 10 weeks, it's bringing in a network of 30 or so people from different parts of our region who bring different expertise to the table, just to be clear about that. But yeah, we're just coming out of it. I just was doing a lot of one-on-one coaching through that time. And also realizing I probably can't just depend on doing this always in person, as much as I love that. And so a lot of pressure to build an online training platform. But yeah, we with this current, incentivizing farmer project that I'm talking about, yes, we will be having biannual conferences, and regional trainings. Trainings in different, similar to kind of what we've been doing. But I don't know, we have to always be prepared for whatever could be coming next. Did you all read that article that COVID is like nature's correction? Have you read that one?
I've heard those sentiments. I don't know if I read.
Just the decimation of biodiversity. Like we were saying, when you have a mono species like deer or bats, viruses they just race across the species. They leap to humans more rapidly. Our bodies aren't ready for that.
Right. Kind of
not to be too doomer about it.
Yeah.
But
well, you got to go through the doomer before you go through the optimism.
You need to read Wendell's book on sex something and local economies. And he talks about the difference between hope and optimism.
Yeah.
And I'd love for you all to read that. I can send you the actual link on it. It's a really interesting approach. And he always,
change our name to Doomer Hope.
What?
Should we change our name to Doomer Hope?
I think you should, Ani. I think it could be a little more artistic somehow, but that's just me. Well, whatever. The purpose is clear. What y'all are about. But yeah, I think I told you that, Jason, that when I was feeling pretty down even before COVID, I was just really like, are we gonna get there? I don't know. I was feeling pretty hopeless. I was just visiting Wendell, and he just said, times are too dire to be anything but hopeful. Mm. And that stuck with me because it recognized how dire things actually really are, because I'm not a Pollyanna. But that, if I'm going to be here on this earth in these times, then I have to work with the hope that I have.
Mm-hmm. So kind of a little bit along those lines, do you have a gut sense of kind of like a timetable, like when you look out at the next 5 years, next 10 years and 20 years and anticipating big changes, some disintegration of key systems and that sort of thing? Do you see like an influx of population to Appalachia from other parts of the country? Do you see an exodus of population from Appalachia to other places? Like what, can you maybe look in your crystal ball a little bit and talk about what, kinds of challenges you're preparing for, or you want to encourage other people to prepare for?
My crystal ball is trying to follow demographic data. I know I can have feelings about it, and my feelings is that, I do well, and there are trends of people we know there's a huge trend of people moving to Western North Carolina, the Appalachian region. It's massive. It's overwhelming. It's not sustainable, actually. And the land and housing prices are showing that. And it's only, it's forcing a wealthy, very wealthy economy of people of wealth. But when you look, I mean, there's mixed. So I just want to say what I've been seeing, a lot of my hope actually comes from watching the values trends of people in different age groups and the values of people under 45. And they're diametrically different from people 55 and 65 and older. And those values are much more open and accepting and valuing, like 72% of millennials value the environment. And I'm seeing that, and I've been seeing this world like of regenerative ag, which when we were in it 10 years ago, it was being done. It wasn't named that, but it was much more obscure. When I see just the exponential explosion of what's happening in this space, fake as some of it may be, or whatever the BS around it, it's here to stay. And so those are, to me, hopeful trends. In the meantime, we've, our propped up economy is, when I see what's happening with land values, and making it unaffordable for any new folks. And it's happening in Kentucky, one of the, cheapest, land values in the area, but it's skyrocketing. That's where I struggle with this. I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen I can see these trends. I can see changing values. I can see the valuing. I mean, I'd love to say I see us spending the rest of our lives rewilding our places. But then there's just this really evil structure that seems to, I mean, I'm following Biden and what he's doing, and I'm like, okay, so he is trying to focus more on regional production. It's not, it's not what it could be, but, I just, that's where it's our political structure that has me the most concerned, and our political structure that's been so fragmented by divisiveness amongst us as a country and all over the world, really, that I don't. Are we going to be able to get past this huge divisiveness? I have family who we 100% sort of disagree, but I love them, and I keep feeling like maybe we could talk through some things, because we have that common love for one another. Mm-hmm. So I know that's kind of a roundabout way for what you're asking. I'm just telling you, this is where I'm at with this, is that I still, I do hold hope in those shifting values as some mindsets sort of, die off, as it were. And this is, again, not my anecdotal experience. This is me. I just follow demographic data.
Yeah. And
I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, I imagine, I think COVID woke a lot of people up, and it seems like, as I think a lot of people in the Doomer Optimism space anticipate shocks coming more and more frequently, whatever it be, pandemics,
war,
crises, weather, climate instability, food system crisis, all of these things that seem to be right on the horizon, some immediately on the horizon, like the food system crisis.
Yep.
For me, the hope is that it does it does wake people up and shift their values in time to go through this eye of the regenerative needle, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to just accelerate the divisive, the kind of divisive culture war that I could just as easily see it doing that and just leading to very bad places for all of us.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. And this is one place though where we have so much in common with one another, and that is around farming. And that farmers, my family, my dad's family out west, are farmers, and they're very, their perspective on things is very different from mine politically, but we all care about the land. And I'm like, okay, can this be a place where we can move forward together? Because I'm talking with my cousin about, what we're doing now. He's pretty excited about it. We just don't really go there with the politics so much.
Let me ask you about this. So something I recall reading from Wendell Berry a while ago was he made the point that sometime around the early 90s, the U.S. Census stopped collecting data on farmers. Like the people designated as farmers, like, got to so low of a percentage of the population that they just eliminated that category, right? Because we spent all 100 years using fossil fuels essentially to fuel large machinery, to generate chemical fertilizers and that sort of thing, and basically get human labor off of the farm as much as we could because it seemed cheaper to run everything off of fossil fuels.
Right.
Something I've anticipated for a long time is that the path forward necessarily means that a greater percentage of the population is going to have to be involved in a hands-on way with primary productivity type activities, whether it's farming or forestry. More and more people need to be getting involved.
Right.
At the same time, we live in a culture where if you do it all good at school when you're growing up, you get put on the college track, and sent away from home to go off somewhere, to go to college, to get a white collar job, to sit in front of a computer somewhere in an office. And so one of the trends that I want to kind of see going is that there are more attractive options for, keeping people in places like Appalachia, recruiting young people, like incentivizing them that they want to stay, that they want to be a part of this economic transformation, that they would actually be enthusiastic about a lot of these jobs in small agriculture, even though that's a bit of a countercultural mindset, I think, compared to like where our society has been, for the past 50 or 100 years. So I'm curious to know if, like, maybe you all have programs that are specifically targeting young people or supporting young people, or what are your observations from your work in how is it that we can keep people from leaving home and have them feel that there is a really valuable opportunity in the regenerative economy, in Kentucky and West Virginia and North Carolina and so on.
Right. There are myriad young farmer networks, as you probably know, across the region. What I find about the Appalachian region is a lot of young folks actually want to stay, but there's just been little for them to stay for. They definitely have a sense of family and loyalty to a place that I didn't necessarily see when I was living in the Bay Area. And so there's something about that. But then so many families grow their own food, and they have for generations. But that's not, like you said, that's not enough for them to be sustained doing it. And most young folks are, what we've handed generations, 40 and under is a culture is like the lowest wealth. It's insane what has been handed to younger folks in terms of, having wealth and controlling wealth. It's minuscule compared to what it was 30 years ago for people the same age. So that said, I'm seeing, and again, just anecdotally, I see lots of young folks really wanting to work in farming, and I'm like, hell yes, okay, how can we help you get into that? And that's just, but then I realize of course I'm seeing that, this is what I'm doing, and I try not to base my, my projections on what I see. But I do, and the thing is, I've also seen such different studies on the trends of young people going into farming, and I'm like, well, which are even valid? It seems like even when you look at academic studies or research, it's often biased in some fashion for some predicted outcome. So it's hard for me to say. I know that West North Carolina, as far as programs on the ground, they have a very robust young farmer matching program where they're matching young folks with farms, for older farmers that want to hand off that farming. However, as far as the ownership of the land, that's where we get into that challenge of young folks not having the money to buy the land.
Yeah.
And that's where that has to change. That's where, these trends in funding towards regenerative ag are encouraging for me. I'm still, it's only happened in the last couple of years. Yeah. So we could just do our best to make it work.
Before we wrap up, I would be remiss not to give you an opportunity to, and I think our audience would be really interested in this, of your relationship with Wendell and how he's influenced you, and both of his writings, but also your personal relationship. And I know you had something written that's if you want, but I'm sure our audience would be very interested in a little bit more about that personal relationship. Because I also think it pertains to the larger conversation, because Wendell, I think, is very much, when we were talking about farming being this kind of connecting piece, Wendell Berry is admired by people all over the political spectrum.
Yes.
Right? It seems to transcend our current culture war polarization, because he just speaks very, with a lot of humility and just a lot of reverence for place. And I think everybody can resonate with that. So I don't know if you want to say more about that.
Thank you. I love him an awful lot. He's just meant a lot to me personally, not just with his writings that, have inspired me, but as a human being, and even just the, moving back to Kentucky and the difficulty of our marriage ending, and Wendell, and I'm sorry, I'm going to cry a little bit. The way that he cares for my children, and especially through some difficult times that my son had, the way he showed up for us and him. And when we visit, it's never about the work. It's really just family. We visit, we talk about family, but every time I go away, I just feel like I feel good. And yes, he wrote me it is, I mentioned to you, it's a little embarrassing because, it's just more than I ever would have expected. But he did send me a letter. I was nominated for a fellowship, and I asked him, would he mind to write a recommendation letter? So he did. Dear interested persons, and I might have, I don't know. I don't think I don't want to bother with sharing it on the screen, although I could. But anyway, I have known, it's typed by Tanya, who is an important part of that family, Wendell and Tanya, his wife. I have known Sara Day Evans for 37 years. She is steady, courageous, and persistent in dealing with problems and responsibilities. And she's been admirably loyal year after year to her family and friends. Her work for many years has a long-term basis, both in the needs to which it is addressed and in her long-term personal commitment and enthusiasm. She's smart, persistent, meaning hardhead, and well able to involve other people in her efforts. I bribe them with bourbon or something. That was my edit. But what interests and pleasures me most is her interest in founding the local economies of Central Appalachia and other needy and neglected rural areas upon the local land, people, and resources. this seems to me a far more promising than the ever popular political scheme of bringing in industry. The problem is that industry submits to being brought in only in response to mostly public incentives, as we've been talking about, and typically for the purpose of exploiting the local land and people. I have in mind the history of Fruit of the Loom, which came into Russell Springs, Kentucky, with a fanfare of charity and neighborliness, yet, of course, to cheapen production, really to cheapen production. They departed from Russell Springs, of course, as soon as it became possible to cheapen production elsewhere. To this, I prefer, with obvious and good reason, Sara Day's efforts to improve the local economies of agriculture and forestry.
Nice.
So I got the fellowship.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It was nice. Yeah. So that's much too kind, but like I said, he means an awful lot to me just personally, and I feel fortunate that he's part of I call him my outlaw uncle.
Yeah. Well, Josh, do you have any more questions? I want to, at the end, I want to give Sara Day your opportunity to, if there's any questions you wish we would have asked, or you wish somebody would ask you, or just something you want to talk about. But also I want to give Josh, before you're up, do you have any more questions, Josh?
I don't have anything burning. I just want to hear from you, Sara Day. What have we missed, or what final messages do you want to leave people with? And special for the Doomer optimists.
Yeah. And number one, I only discovered the Doomer optimists in the last, 6 months. I feel like I want to know a lot more about this group and what they're at. What are they at? And how they are, because so this critical piece of peer support and the human aspect of what we're doing is critical. And so how are you all supporting one another I'm just very curious to know more. I tried to listen to a number of the podcasts and get a sense, and it's wild. And that's okay. I grew up in a pretty wild household in a wild place. So I'm appreciating knowing all of you all, because I have been kind of, isolated and just, head down in this area for a long time. So just know that as we move forward, I remain, cautiously hopeful. But I also know that I just want to say this about incentives, because Wendell made that point. I'm like, how can it just become standard that farmers are able to afford being on the land and taking good care of the land? How can that just become what we do? Yeah. I know, because we're looking at all these different kinds of incentive type funds, and as someone who's worked, as with commerce and incentives, that can come and go at a political whim. So how we build this incentivization to be just standard is still a critical question for me, and I welcome your all's insights on that, and how can we convene around that. And I mean, there's just so many ways, there's all this funny money floating around in the world, and I'm like, yeah, but what, yes, money is important, but how can we build resilience, beyond that? And I think a lot of your listeners are doing it. I mean, you're at it, and I just wonder, what are they struggling with? Are they lonely? Are they like needing, what kind of support do they need as they are doing what you all are doing? I don't have a farm. I work on my friend Jane's farm. Right. She's just down the road from me. But
I think we're kind of still discovering ourselves, right? This term has only been around for like a little over a year.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And it's just a bunch of people who met on Twitter, basically. And a few of us are starting to meet in real life. Actually, Josh discovered us through the podcast, and then he lived nearby, and we've been visiting each other's places and helping each other out with things. And I think that it's a lot of people who, one, feel disaffected from, our current industrial civilization, perhaps feel lonely in their communities, or they feel like, are they going crazy, or is society going crazy? And a lot of homesteaders, or starting to homestead, have a little bit of land, or they live in a suburb and they're starting, some small raised beds, or people who live in cities and feel stuck and want to move in a regenerative direction. But it is very hard out there for this younger generation.
Yes. 4.1% of the wealth they control, whereas boomers controlled 25% at the same age.
Yeah, I think what we're trying to do now is really, I think we're still kind of in the connecting phase, like just putting our voices out there, creating kind of a collective where different people can host podcasts, different people can and just trying to connect with who's out there in different regions that resonate with these kinds of messages. And then Ashley and I and Josh as well have talked a lot about what's next, right? Like now that we've kind of created this loose network, how do we actually, for me, I think very much bioregionally, like how do we basically use this network to incentivize the, local bioregional networks that meet each other and do real things in the real economy and ecology. And so for me, that's where I want, where I personally want to head, with,
right.
in this region.
In this region. But it can be done. So here's what I'd like to just make a little ask out here is, so we have this design, and it's a pretty good design for this accelerator model. Yeah. Getting it up, and it can be, one of the reasons I got the fellowship was that this model can be, adapted to regions all over the world. And, but we, there are a lot of technical aspects to making that come about. So I guess my thought is, if there are folks in your network, and I know you've got a strong tech background of, possibly helping to, get this model online in a way that's really useful. Here's where I can't just do some plug and play thing. It's like, it has to be adaptable to each region. We've got all these various ecosystems. So just, I don't know, just putting that out there.
Yeah. So maybe people can reach out, and if they're interested in, say, helping with technical platforms, we definitely do have people in our network who have the programming,
right,
skills,
experience to do that. I know there's lots of plug and play education templates. I know that. It's just more like how could it and we'd have to find the funding as well, because I'm not like, go do this for no pay. I don't do that. We always pay people market rates. I often don't get, I got to do a better job of paying myself. I'm working on that. But that said, is that, for urban folks that this could, the whole idea, another idea behind another piece of this that's important is the connecting the urban and the rural, because you got to have each other. And so this is designed to do that as well. So folks reach out. We've thought through a lot of it.
Through the website,
Sara Day. Sara Day at acceleratingappalachia.org.
Yeah.
I've become less engaged with social media. I admire, I might keep on going, y'all, but it was just such a time suck, and made me angry a lot too. And I just was like, okay, I can't really engage in these conversations like this. I was having a hard time with it.
Do you have any, are there any open programs that you guys have right now, or any call for applications that you have specifically for?
Not right now. Not right. I'm glad you brought that up, Josh, because coming out of COVID, I do still do one-on-one advising with folks, but we when we we're doing this shift right now to the funding to being able to actually design this program. I would call it a separate program, actually, even though we're utilizing a lot of the similar networks of our businesses and farmers. So no, there's not an application right now. We need to get this up and going, and we do need to get our program online. We need to get our training program online. And I realized that. I finally accepted it, but it has to have elements of people coming together. Again, it's regional, so it shouldn't be that hard for people to actually be able to meet up some, through conferences and stuff. But yeah, I love the in-person stuff.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And I also want to extend the invitation. One kind of heuristic is not rigid, but if somebody's been interviewed on the podcast, they're qualified to also host podcasts. So if there's people in your network that you think their voice needs to be heard to a larger audience, and you would like to host it and bring in, we usually have 2 hosts, and so you can do it yourself or bring in one of us, whoever. I want to extend that offer to you as well. So
I'm adding this to my long list of notes here that I prepared prior that I didn't hardly get. Thank goodness you didn't give me 3 hours. I will add that. Absolutely. Yes, because I've been pushed many times to start my own podcast, to write a book. All those things. And I'm working on all of it sort of along the other things. And so I think that's a great idea. So I don't have to start my own. I'm like, yeah, let's get some folks on here. There are amazing people doing incredible work. And
that would be great. I'm biased towards Appalachian. So if this becomes Doomer Optimism Appalachia, I would be okay with that.
Okay, cool.
It's like taking over.
Yeah.
Well, somebody else can start, Doomer. I want to tell you, whenever I say your name, it comes out Doomer Optometrist for some reason. I'm
there's a guy whose Twitter handle is Doomer Optometrist.
Oh, okay, I'm like, what are you all seeing that I'm not seeing? Doomers. Anyway.
Yeah.
I'd love to do that. I can think of so many people that would be great. I think could be helpful and inspirational.
That would be great. We also, you mentioned writing, we also have a Substack where we basically just publish a bunch of people's, writings, short writings. And we've had three, we've had their manifesto, their Doomer Optimism manifesto, action-oriented, what are they doing? And I think origin stories is like, how do they got where they are? And they're all like not too long, like a little, like kind of like a blog post.
Okay. That's where I'm like writing a book feels, and I just, I'm a writer. I've been a writer for, I'm a poet, right? I've been a writer for most of my life, it seems like, nice. But I have a hard time with a conscripted sort of, thing. It always feels overwhelming to me. But Substack, and then I also wanted to mention real quick, Rhizoma Field School. She'd asked about, I did want to address one of her questions very quickly if we have time. If we don't, we don't. Okay. She had asked about, what does Wendell think? What do I think about The Economist covering him? I haven't talked to Wendell since that came out, but my take on it is that it's patronizing. On the one hand, it's nice to see Wendell in there. It's like, he gives them, but I think the headline, the charm of Wendell Berry, and this sort of pastoral, but almost impossible vision, which I think is a critical vision. And so it is typically, I found in urban areas, there's so much naivety about the work and how critical it is, and how critical it is to their survival as well. And I found that, a lot when I'm in New York or wherever, is that there's just a lot of ignorance about what's actually going on here. And I'm like, wow. But anyway, that's my take on it, is that Wendell has been covered in every, major publication and ever in existence. And I'm like, it still felt, it was nice, but it wasn't, to me, it wasn't acknowledging sort of the critical force that he is in the land that we so very depend on.
Yeah.
So, right.
If you have any specific people in Western North Carolina, especially in the northwestern part of the state where Jason and I are, we're sort of starting a little mutual support group where we'll maybe go around each other's places and help out on work days and stuff like that.
Night. Yeah, going with the Amish and the Mennonite barn raisings. Okay. There's a ton of folks. So I'll there's so many. I'll have to sit with that one because there's a lot of folks doing things that you should be plugged into one another. They're also just pretty overwhelmed. Just know that it's like, well, farmers are just like, wow, like back to back. But some of the folks are working on the carbon exchange women. It's like 3 women and they're all in sort of the Asheville region are brilliant. Laura Lennick, of course, and Meredith Clay, Ethical Meat Handbook, she wrote. And what they're building is cool. And there's actually a call. They do have a call for applications. Oh, shit. Yes. Okay. Go to Carbon Harvest. Okay. Their website is Carbon Harvest.
Okay.
And they're doing a call for farmers that want to be a part of their pilot Western North Carolina regional, their regional regenerative. I mean, it's going to be Western North Carolina focused carbon exchange.
Cool.
Yeah. All right. On that, I think that's a good way to end it.
Great. Thank you.
So great to meet you both. And I just look forward to, moving forward together.
Yeah. Let's do it. Let's do it.
Okay, you guys.
All right.
Thanks. Have a good afternoon.